Something about fame has a way of shaping stories into something larger than life. From the outside, it often looks like success, freedom, and a dream lived in front of millions. But sometimes when the cameras stop rolling and the spotlight fades just slightly, a very different reality begins to surface, one filled with hardship, controversy, loss, and choices that change everything. This is exactly what happened with one of reality television's most unusual families. For years, viewers followed their journey, fascinated by their off-grid lifestyle, their survival skills, and their belief that they could thrive far away from modern society. They weren't just a family on TV, they were a phenomenon. People didn't just watch them, they believed in them. But beneath that image of strength and unity, a series of deeply personal struggles, legal battles, health crises, and emotional breakdowns unfolded over time. And as the years went on, those hidden layers slowly began to surface in ways no one expected. This is the untold, often painful reality behind the cast members, where some faced prison, some faced illness, and others faced battles within themselves that were far more dangerous than the wilderness they once called home. And as we go deeper into each story, one thing becomes clear. Survival was never just about living off the land. It was about surviving life itself. At the center of everything was the family's patriarch, a man who shaped not only their lifestyle but their identity. He was often seen as the driving force behind their off-grid existence, a man determined to raise his family away from modern society and build something entirely their own. But his life was not defined only by the wilderness. Long before fame, his early years were marked by tragedy that would change the direction of his entire life. Losing close family members in a sudden disaster during his teenage years left a lasting impact, pushing him toward a life of independence and survival. Over time, he built a family and a philosophy around resilience. Together with his wife, he raised their children in isolation, teaching them to rely on each other above all else. As the television series gained popularity, viewers saw him as a symbol of strength and leadership. But behind the scenes, life was far more complicated. Legal issues surfaced over the years, including accusations tied to residency claims and financial documentation. While many of these situations were resolved through the legal system, they added pressure to a family already living under intense public scrutiny. Despite everything, he remained committed to the lifestyle he had chosen. But his health began to tell a different story. In his later years, serious medical issues emerged. He experienced repeated health complications, including seizures and respiratory problems. At one point, his condition became so severe that he required major medical intervention. Doctors warned that continuing to live in a remote, high-altitude environment could put his life at risk. But his attachment to the land he built his life on was unwavering. He made a decision that defined his final years. He would stay where he belonged, no matter the consequences. Eventually, his health declined further, and he passed away unexpectedly after suffering a seizure. His death sent shockwaves through fans and family alike, marking the end of an era that had defined the entire series. The family described him as their foundation, the person who held everything together. And in many ways, his absence became the turning point that changed everything that followed. If the patriarch represented strength and leadership, the family's mother represented endurance in its purest form. For years, she stood beside her husband, raising their children in some of the most remote environments imaginable. Her role was not only that of a parent, but also a stabilizing force in a life that constantly demanded adaptation. But her greatest battle would not come from the wilderness. It came from her own body. During what initially seemed like routine health discomfort, doctors discovered something far more serious than expected. She was diagnosed with an advanced form of cancer that had already spread extensively. The diagnosis was devastating. The odds were not in her favor, and the medical team prepared her family for a long and uncertain fight. What followed was an intense period of treatment, chemotherapy, radiation, hospital stays, and physical deterioration that took her weight down to dangerously low levels. There were moments when survival itself seemed uncertain, but against expectations, her body responded to treatment. Slowly, she began to recover. After months of medical care, she reached remission, a moment that brought overwhelming relief to her family. For a time, it seemed like the worst was behind them. However, her health journey did not end there. Years later, she faced additional medical complications, including respiratory infections that required emergency hospitalization. Once again, her strength was tested, and once again she fought through it with the support of her family. As of recent updates, she continues to live under medical supervision, but has remained in stable condition. Her story became one of survival not just in the wilderness, but in life itself. The eldest son of the family was once seen as a key part of the group's survival structure. He was involved in early filming and played an active role in the family's off-grid systems. But behind the scenes, he was dealing with personal struggles that would eventually pull him away from the show entirely. His battle with substance use became public after legal issues brought attention to his situation. He entered rehabilitation programs multiple times in an attempt to regain control of his life. Each return to treatment reflected a deeper internal struggle, one that could not be solved quickly or easily. At one point, he briefly rejoined the family and the series, but the underlying issues persisted, leading to another separation. Over time, tensions within the family grew, and his distance from them increased. He later stepped away completely from the show and began rebuilding his life independently. In a quieter setting away from television, he focused on recovery and personal reflection. He began sharing aspects of his journey publicly, speaking about sobriety, accountability, and the challenges of overcoming addiction. His path was not simple, but it was ongoing. And for many viewers, his story became one of the most human reminders that fame does not shield anyone from personal battles. As the children grew older, the unity that once defined the family began to fracture in different ways. Some siblings chose privacy, stepping away from the spotlight entirely. Others remained more visible, continuing to engage with public life and media attention. But with distance came tension. Disagreements within the family became more frequent and, at times, deeply personal. Legal disputes, restraining orders, and public accusations created divides that were difficult to repair. One of the most complex dynamics involved conflicts between siblings and their extended family members, leading to court filings and serious allegations that drew widespread attention. While many of these matters remained unresolved or were dismissed in court, the emotional impact within the family was undeniable. Relationships that once appeared unbreakable became strained. And as each member pursued their own path, the idea of a single unified family began to fade. Several members of the family encountered legal challenges over the years. Some of these were tied to financial documentation and residency claims from earlier years, resulting in court cases and penalties. Others involved more recent personal disputes, including allegations of domestic conflict and protective orders. In one case, a family member faced arrest following an incident involving a partner, which led to legal proceedings and eventual release under negotiated conditions. In another situation, accusations of harassment and threats between relatives led to court filings that were ultimately denied due to insufficient evidence. These events did not affect every member equally, but they contributed to a growing narrative of instability surrounding the family. What once appeared as a unified survival story began to look increasingly complex when viewed through the lens of real-world consequences. Romantic relationships within the family's circle also became a major part of their public story. Several marriages and partnerships went through cycles of separation and reconciliation. Custody arrangements, public disputes, and emotional breakdowns often played out alongside ongoing media attention. In some cases, couples managed to maintain cooperative co-parenting relationships despite separation. In others, the breakdowns were more difficult, involving legal filings and long periods of conflict. At the same time, new relationships emerged, signaling fresh starts for some members who were trying to move forward from past instability. These developments reflected a broader theme within the family story. Change was constant, and stability was never guaranteed. The younger members of the family, who grew up in front of cameras, also faced their own challenges. Some experienced mental health struggles during adolescence, including periods of depression and emotional distress. Others faced legal issues or personal conflicts that became public later in their lives. One sibling, in particular, spoke openly about experiencing depression at a young age and struggling with motivation and identity while growing up under constant public attention. These revelations added a deeper layer to the family's story, showing that life in the spotlight from childhood came with emotional costs that were not immediately visible to viewers. Looking back, the family's journey was never just about survival in the wilderness. It was about survival under pressure of fame, expectation, personal struggle, and public scrutiny. What began as a story of unity gradually transformed into a complex web of individual paths, each shaped by different challenges. Some members found healing through distance and privacy. Others continued to face ongoing struggles. And some rebuilt their lives piece by piece after hitting their lowest points. But through it all, one truth remains constant. The image seen on television was only a fraction of a much larger reality. Behind every episode, there were real people dealing with real consequences: grief, illness, legal battles, addiction, and personal transformation. As time moves forward, the legacy of his family continues to evolve. For some, it represents resilience and survival against all odds. For others, it is a reminder of how quickly fame can expose personal struggles to the world. But perhaps the most important takeaway is this: no matter how strong a story appears on the surface, there is always another layer beneath it, one that the cameras may never fully capture. And in the case of this family, those unseen layers tell a story far more complicated, far more emotional, and far more human than anyone ever expected.